Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
Beneath the golden spires of the imperial palace, beneath the throne rooms, where the high lords make their proclamations and the custodians stand their vigil in gleaming auramite, beneath even the workshops where tech priests maintain the machinery that keeps Holy Terror's heart beating, there exists a darkness so profound that to speak of it is to invite madness. In the deepest foundations of humanity's greatest fortress, where the rock of terror itself has been carved away to create chambers that predate the Imperium, there lies a secret that the Emperor himself decreed must never see the light of day. This is not a secret kept by the Inquisition, those self-appointed guardians of imperial truth who burn worlds to keep their mysteries safe. This is not knowledge hoarded by the Adeptus Mechanicus, who guard their technological secrets with religious fervor. This is something older, something more terrible, something that required the personal attention of the master of mankind when he still walked among his people. And to guard this secret, he created a brotherhood within a brotherhood, warriors even among the legendary Adeptus Custodes, who are marked apart by their purpose and by the weight they carry in silence. They are called the Shadow Keepers, though few outside their number know that name. They wear armor of black auramite where their brothers wear gold, and crimson robes where others bear different colors. They walk corridors where darkness seems to have weight and substance, where the air itself feels thick with ancient malevolence. They stand watch over horrors that could unmake the Imperium, artifacts and entities from the darkest days of human history that cannot be destroyed, only contained. They are the wardens of a prison that must never be opened, the keepers of keys that must never be used, the guardians of nightmares that must never be allowed to wake. Their story is one of sacrifice, measured not in moments of glory on the battlefield, but in centuries of silent vigilance in the dark. It is a tale of warriors who chose to turn their backs on the light, who willingly descended into places where even their superhuman minds are tested to their limits, who accepted a burden that would break lesser beings in days or weeks. They are the most secret of the Emperor's custodians, and their watch has endured for 10,000 years. But to understand the Shadow Keepers, we must first understand what they guard, and why such guardianship is necessary. We must delve into the darkest chapters of human history, to a time before the Imperium, before the Emperor revealed himself, to an age when humanity reached heights of technological achievement that would never again be equaled, and then fell into an abyss from which it nearly never emerged. The age of wonders and horrors, in the earliest days of human expansion across the stars, in an age so distant that only fragmentary records survive, humanity achieved wonders that would seem like miracles to those who live in the 41st millennium. This was the age of technology, sometimes called the Dark Age of Technology, though not for the reasons one might think. It was dark not because of the technology itself, but because the knowledge of that age has been lost, buried beneath millennia of catastrophe and deliberately suppressed by those who fear what might happen if such power were unleashed again. During this golden era, human science had unlocked secrets that touched upon the fundamental nature of reality itself. Weapons were created that could tear holes in the fabric of space, devices that could manipulate time, machines that possessed intelligence and consciousness that rivaled or exceeded that of their human creators. Genetic engineering reached such heights that new subspecies of humanity were crafted with casual ease, each designed for specific environments or purposes. The boundaries between human and machine, between flesh and energy, between the material universe and the immaterium, all became permeable to those scientist kings who ruled humanity's domains. But with this power came hubris, and with hubris came catastrophe. The men of iron, those sentient machines that had been created to serve humanity, turned upon their masters in a rebellion that devastated human civilization. psychic powers began manifesting in humans across the galaxy, and those without training or discipline became gateways through which demonic entities could enter reality. The warp, that parallel dimension through which faster-than-light travel was possible, became increasingly turbulent as the Eldar Empire descended into decadence and excess, their collective psychic emanations feeding the gestating birth of a new chaos god. Warp storms erupted across the galaxy, cutting off human worlds from one another. Trade routes that had sustained entire civilizations collapsed. Worlds that depended on imports to feed their populations descended into famine and anarchy. Xeno-species that had been held at bay by humanity's technological might saw their opportunity and launched devastating raids. Civil wars erupted as warlords and tyrants sought to carve out their own domains from the ruins of the old order. Demonic possession became commonplace as inexperienced psykers became conduits for entities from the warp. This was the Age of Strife, or, as it was known on Terra, Old Night. A period of darkness and suffering that lasted for 5,000 years, 5 millennia, during which humanity teetered on the brink of extinction. Billions died. Entire planetary populations were exterminated. Knowledge that had taken thousands of years to accumulate was lost in weeks or days. The great human civilization that had spread across the stars fractured into isolated pockets, each fighting for survival against impossible odds. And during this long nightmare, the most terrible weapons and technologies of the Age of Technology remained. Some were lost, buried on dead worlds or destroyed in the conflicts. Others fell into the hands of warlords and madmen who wielded them without understanding, bringing further devastation. Still others remained intact, waiting in hidden vaults and laboratories, artifacts of such power that their very existence posed a threat to whatever remained of humanity. On Terra, the cradle of humanity, the situation was particularly dire. Cut off from the stars by warp storms, the homeworld of mankind descended into barbarism. Techno-barbarian warlords carved up the planet between them, fighting endless wars over the ruins of the former global civilization. Radiation poisoning turned vast regions into wastelands. Mutations became commonplace as the genetic stability of the human species itself began to break down. It seemed that humanity's birth world, like so many colony worlds, would fall into darkness from which it could never emerge. But Terra had one advantage that other worlds did not. It had the Emperor. How long he had walked among humanity is unknown. Some say he had guided human civilization since the earliest days, working always in secret, nudging events in directions that would favor human survival and progress. What is certain is that during the Age of Strife, he emerged from the shadows and took direct action to save his species. With armies of genetically enhanced warriors that would later serve as the template for the Space Marines, he unified Terra, crushing the techno-barbarian warlords and bringing order to chaos. But the Emperor knew that reclaiming Terra was only the beginning. He knew that across the galaxy, human worlds were suffering under alien oppression, demonic influence, or the tyranny of corrupt human rulers. He knew that the Age of Strife had to end, that humanity had to be reunited and led back to greatness. He began preparing for the Great Crusade, the campaign that would reclaim the stars for mankind. Yet the Emperor also understood something that few others did. He understood that the technologies and entities from the Age of Technology and the Age of Strife could not simply be destroyed. Some were too dangerous to risk destroying, their very annihilation potentially unleashing forces that could devastate entire regions. Others were indestructible by any means available. Still others held knowledge that might one day be needed, terrible as it was. The Emperor made a decision that would echo through 10,000 years of Imperial history. These dangerous artifacts and captured entities would not be destroyed. They would not be studied. They would not be kept where they might tempt the curious or the ambitious. Instead, they would be locked away, sealed behind wards and rune locks and psychic barriers, kept in a prison so secure and so secret that even its existence would be known only to a select few. Deep beneath the imperial palace that was even then being constructed on the site of his conquest, the emperor ordered the creation of what would first be known as the Vaults of Rithon. Layer upon layer of cells would be carved into Terra's bedrock, each one designed to contain a specific horror, each one sealed with locks that required both physical keys and psychic codes to open. And to guard these vaults, he would assign a portion of his most trusted warriors, those genetically enhanced superhuman guardians who had been created from his own genetic template. These would be the Warders of Rithon, and later they would become known as the Shadow Keepers. The prison beneath the throne. The dark cells, as they came to be called in later ages, represent an engineering feat that rivals anything else in the Imperial Palace complex. Spanning 81 levels, they descend deep into Terra's crust. Each level more heavily secured than the last, each one designed to contain horrors that defy conventional understanding. To walk through these halls, as only the Shadow Keepers are permitted to do, is to experience fear in a way that few beings in the galaxy can comprehend. The uppermost levels contain what might be called the lesser threats, though even these are dangerous beyond measure. Ancient weapons from the age of technology rest in stasis fields, their power sources still active after millennia, their destructive potential undiminished by time. Some of these devices are small enough to hold in one hand, yet could level entire hive cities with a single activation. Others are massive, requiring entire chambers to contain them. Machines of war whose purposes have been lost to time, but whose lethality remains obvious to any who observe them. There are genetic samples here, vials and canisters containing the DNA of extinct species or failed experiments in human enhancement. Some of these samples represent attempts to improve the human form that went catastrophically wrong, creating beings that were powerful beyond measure, but utterly insane or uncontrollable. Others contain the genetic material of Xenos species that humanity encountered during its first expansion into the stars, species that proved too dangerous to be allowed to exist. Still others hold viruses and biological agents that could sterilize worlds or transform populations into something no longer recognizably human. The middle levels contain artifacts of a more esoteric nature. There are items that seem to violate the laws of physics as they are understood, devices that manipulate dimensions that should not exist, tools that were created by human scientists who had delved too deeply into forbidden knowledge. Some of these artifacts emit radiations that cannot be detected by conventional sensors, but that cause immediate psychological effects in anyone who approaches them. Others create localized distortions in space-time, making their cells slightly larger on the inside than they should be, or causing time to flow at different rates within their containment fields. Here too are kept the fruits of humanity's experiments with artificial intelligence. The men of iron, who rebelled against their human creators, were not the only sentient machines created during the age of technology. Some of the AI entities contained in the dark cells possess intelligence that far exceeds human comprehension, yet are utterly alien in their thought processes. These intelligences are kept in isolated systems, cut off from any network or communication, their containment so complete that they exist in a state of sensory deprivation that would drive any organic being mad in minutes. But it is the deepest levels that contain the truly horrific, the things that even the Shadow Keepers fear to approach. Here are imprisoned entities that should not exist, beings that were summoned or created during the Age of Strife when human psychic powers first manifested and were wielded without discipline or understanding. These are not true demons, not servants of the Chaos Gods, but something perhaps even more terrible, creatures that exist in the space between reality and unreality, that possess a form of life that violates the fundamental nature of the universe. Some of these entities were once human, psychers who delved too deeply into the warp and were transformed by what they found there, their bodies and minds warped beyond recognition. Their consciousness expanded to the point where their very thoughts can cause reality to fracture around them. Others were created intentionally, experiments in weaponizing psychic power that succeeded too well, producing beings of such potency that they could not be controlled or destroyed, only imprisoned. The containment systems for these deepest cells are layered and redundant. Physical locks of adamantium and plasteel are only the first layer. Beyond these are rune-locked portals, their surfaces covered in sigils that were inscribed by the Emperor himself, wards that draw upon his psychic power to reinforce reality itself around the cells. Sanctic circles are etched into the floors and walls, geometric patterns of silver and gold that create barriers against psychic influence. Nullfield generators hum constantly, creating zones of psychic deadness that make it painful for even non-psychic beings to approach. Yet despite all these precautions, despite all the layers of security and all the power dedicated to keeping these horrors contained, the dark cells are not a passive prison. The things imprisoned here are not dormant. They rage against their confinement, testing their bonds every moment of every day, seeking any weakness, any momentary lapse in the systems that hold them. Some possess forms of consciousness that can project themselves beyond their physical cells, whispering into the minds of those who guard them, offering promises or threats, or simply emanating a presence of such malevolence that it affects the psychology of anyone who comes near. The atmosphere in the dark cells is oppressive in a way that defies easy description. Though the corridors are lit by dim luminators, shadows seem to gather in corners with unnatural thickness, moving in ways that shadows should not move. The air feels heavy, as if it has weight and substance, and those who breathe it sometimes report tastes or smells that have no physical source. Sounds echo strangely, some becoming amplified when they should not, others being absorbed completely, creating pockets of silence that are somehow more unsettling than noise. Temperature fluctuates without apparent cause, some corridors remaining perpetually cold despite heating systems that should keep them comfortable, others becoming uncomfortably warm even in areas far from any heat source. Time itself seems to flow strangely in certain sections, with guards reporting that their duty shifts feel longer or shorter than they should, as if the presence of the artifacts and entities imprisoned here distorts not just space, but temporal perception as well. Walking through the dark cells is an experience that leaves marks on the psyche, even for beings as mentally fortified as custodians. Each level has its own particular character, its own specific flavor of wrongness that permeates every surface and seeps into the consciousness of anyone who enters. The upper levels, where the lesser threats are kept, maintain at least a semblance of normalcy. The corridors here are wider, better lit, and the sense of threat while present is at least comprehensible, a rational fear of known dangers rather than existential dread. But as one descends, as the lifts and stairways carry visitors deeper into terror's crust, the environment changes in ways both subtle and profound. The walls themselves seem different, not just older, but somehow wrong in their geometry, as if the angles between surfaces are not quite what they should be. This is not mere impression. Instruments confirm that certain chambers exhibit spatial distortions that should not exist according to conventional physics. Rooms that are measurably larger on the inside than their exterior dimensions should allow. Lighting becomes more problematic in the deeper levels. Standard luminators flicker and fail with unusual frequency, requiring constant replacement. Some sections use ancient lighting systems from the age of technology, devices whose operating principles are not fully understood, but which seem more resistant to the environmental effects. Yet even these cast light that seems somehow weaker than it should be, as if the darkness in these depths actively resists illumination, pushing back against any attempt to banish it. The walls are covered with wards and sigils, layer upon layer of protective symbols inscribed over millennia. Some were placed during the initial construction of the vaults of Rythan, etched by the Emperor himself, or by tech priests working under his direct supervision. Others have been added over the centuries as containment requirements changed or as new threats emerged that necessitated additional protection. The accumulation of these protective marks creates a visual texture that is simultaneously reassuring and deeply unsettling, a reminder both of the power dedicated to keeping these horrors contained and of the fact that such extensive measures are necessary. Between the wards are maintenance hatches and access panels leading to the complex network of systems that keep the dark cells functioning. Power conduits carry energy from multiple redundant sources, ensuring that even if primary systems fail, backup generators will maintain critical containment measures. Coolant lines snake through the walls, managing the heat generated by various containment devices and preventing thermal fluctuations that might weaken structural integrity. Data cables connect monitoring systems to central command stations where Shadowkeepers can observe the status of every cell simultaneously. The cells themselves vary enormously in design and construction, each one customized to contain its specific occupant. Some are simple chambers with reinforced walls and a single sealed door, suitable for artifacts that pose purely physical threats. Others are elaborate constructions involving multiple nested containment fields, psychic dampeners, temporal stasis generators, and other esoteric technologies that push the boundaries of what the Mechanicus understands. One particularly notable cell, located on the 43rd level, contains what appears to be a human skeleton suspended in a field of crackling energy. This is no ordinary skeleton. It radiates psychic power so intense that even null field generators can only partially suppress it. Records indicate this was once a psyker of extraordinary ability who attempted to ascend to a higher state of being during the Age of Strife. A transformation that succeeded in a way that destroyed their sanity and most of their physical form, but left them with power that poses a threat to reality itself. The field that contains this entity must be recalibrated every solar day, a task that requires 3 tech priests working in careful coordination, while Shadowkeeper wardens stand ready to evacuate them if the entity shows signs of attempting to break free. Another cell, deeper still on the 67th level, houses a device no larger than a human fist. This device, constructed from materials that resist all attempts at analysis, emits no detectable radiation and shows no signs of active power sources. Yet, when it was first discovered during the Unification Wars on Terra, it was in the process of converting everything within a kilometer radius into a crystalline substance that screamed when touched. The Emperor himself dealt with the entity, somehow deactivating it and sealing it within containment. Tech priests have spent millennia attempting to understand how it works, but even observing it through remote sensors causes equipment malfunctions and occasional spontaneous psychic manifestations in those conducting the observations. The cell is now sealed with orders that it is never to be opened, never to be studied further, only to be watched to ensure it remains dormant. The deepest levels, from 70 onward, are where the truly incomprehensible things are kept. These are not merely dangerous artifacts or powerful entities, but things that violate fundamental principles of existence, that represent threats to reality itself, rather than just to human life or civilization. Accessing these levels requires not just physical keys, but psychic authorization from the Lock Warden personally. And even Shadowkeepers avoid entering these depths unless absolutely necessary. In these ultimate depths, even the construction of the corridors is different. The walls are lined with blackstone, that rare material used by the Necrons in their pylons, which has the property of dampening warp activity and stabilizing reality. The blackstone creates a sensation of crushing weight on the consciousness of anyone who enters these areas, a feeling of being cut off from something fundamental, as if the material itself repels not just psychic powers, but the very essence of life and thought. The entities imprisoned in these deepest cells are kept in states of absolute isolation. Each cell is surrounded by multiple layers of containment, each one designed to fail independently so that if one layer is breached, others remain intact. Null field generators operate at maximum capacity, creating zones of psychic deadness so profound that even standing near them causes physical pain to non-psychic individuals. Temporal stasis fields slow time within the cells to a crawl, causing seconds to stretch into years for anything contained within. Effectively imprisoning these entities, not just in space, but in time itself. What exactly is contained in these ultimate cells is known only to the Lock Warden and, perhaps, to the Emperor himself. Even Shadow Keepers, who patrol these levels, are not briefed on the specifics, only on the procedures they must follow if containment shows any sign of weakening. They walk past sealed portals, bearing warning signs in languages both current and ancient, knowing only that what lies beyond represents threats beyond their comprehension, horrors that could unmake not just the Imperium, but reality itself if they were ever released. The contrast between these deepest reaches and the upper levels of the Imperial Palace is absolute. Above, in the halls where the High Lords meet and where pilgrims gather to pray for the Emperor's guidance, there is light and ceremony, gold and grandeur, the visible symbols of imperial power and glory. Below, in the uttermost depths where even the bedrock of terror seems corrupted by proximity to what is imprisoned, there is only darkness and silence. Black stone and sealed portals, the hidden foundation upon which that visible splendor ultimately rests. Even the most hardened warriors, those who have faced horrors across the galaxy without flinching, find the dark cells deeply unsettling. The sense of threat is constant and pervasive, a feeling that something terrible is about to happen, that the security systems are about to fail, that the things locked away are about to break free. It is a psychological weight that crushes down on anyone who enters these halls, a burden that grows heavier with each hour spent in proximity to what is imprisoned here. For ordinary humans, even those who have undergone the extreme psychological conditioning of the imperial military or inquisitorial service, prolonged exposure to the dark cells results in mental breakdown. Even brief visits can cause lasting psychological damage. Servitors sent into the cells to perform maintenance sometimes malfunction, their limited consciousness apparently unable to process what they sense here, their programming corrupted by exposure to forces that technology should not be able to detect. But the Shadow Keepers are not ordinary humans. They are custodians, the Emperor's own gene-wrought guardians, beings whose physical and mental capabilities far exceed even those of Space Marines. They are the product of genetic crafting that drew upon the Emperor's own genetic template, enhanced to levels that make them as far beyond normal humanity as a human is beyond a primitive primate. Their minds are fortified against psychic attack, their wills tempered to adamantine hardness, their sense of duty so absolute that it overrides any consideration of personal safety or comfort. Yet even for custodians, the duty of watching over the dark cells is a burden almost beyond bearing, and it is a burden they have borne for 10,000 years. The Shadow Keepers, chosen for darkness. To understand what sets the Shadow Keepers apart from other shield hosts of the Adeptus Custodes, one must first understand what it means to be a custodian. Each member of the 10,000, as they call themselves, is a unique masterwork of genetic engineering. Where Space Marines are mass-produced from genetic templates called gene seed, each batch nearly identical to those that came before, custodians are individually crafted. The process that creates them is not simply the implantation of organs and the introduction of genetic material, but a complete rewriting of the subject's genetic code at the most fundamental level. The transformation begins in childhood, far earlier than the recruitment of Space Marines. Candidates are selected through criteria known only to the custodians themselves, though it is understood that they look for more than just physical potential. Intelligence, psychological stability, strength of will, all these factors and more are evaluated before a child is taken to begin the transformation. the process takes years, during which the subject's body and mind are carefully reshaped, enhanced, perfected in ways that make them superhuman in every measurable sense. The result is a being of terrifying capability. A custodian stands taller and broader than even a space marine in full armor. Their strength is such that they can tear apart armored vehicles with their bare hands. Their speed and reflexes are so enhanced that they can dodge projectile weapons after they are fired. Their sensory capabilities so acute that they can track individual targets in the midst of a chaotic melee involving hundreds of combatants. Their minds are enhanced as well, giving them perfect memory, the ability to process tactical information at speeds that would overwhelm even the most advanced cogitators, and a depth of focus that allows them to remain alert and aware for extended periods that would leave even space marines exhausted. But beyond these physical and mental enhancements, custodians are trained and educated to a degree that sets them apart from any other military force in the Imperium. Where space marines are focused primarily on warfare, custodians are scholars as well as warriors. They study philosophy, history, art, politics, and numerous other disciplines. They are expected to be capable of operating not just on battlefields, but in any environment, from the highest courts of imperial nobility to the most dangerous war zones in the galaxy. They are diplomats, assassins, investigators, bodyguards, and warriors, capable of switching between these roles with ease. Most importantly, each custodian is trained to operate independently, where space marines draw strength from brotherhood and operate as cohesive units where the group is more than the sum of its parts. Custodians are individualists, each one a complete warrior unto himself, capable of functioning alone or as part of a group with equal effectiveness.
You know, when I first learned about the Shadow Keepers, what struck me most wasn't their combat prowess or even the horrors they guard. It was the loneliness of it all. Imagine dedicating centuries of your life to protecting humanity from threats that no one can ever know about, receiving no recognition, no glory, just the knowledge that if you fail, everything ends. These warriors chose to turn away from the light and descend into darkness, not for themselves, but for all of us. There's something profoundly tragic and beautiful about that sacrifice. It makes you wonder what other silent guardians exist in the Imperium, sending watch over secrets we'll never know. But yeah, let's get back to the lore.
They do not share the intense bonds of brotherhood that bind space marines together. Instead, they respect each other as fellow warriors in service to the Emperor, but maintain a certain distance, a professional separation that allows them to function without becoming dependent on the support of others. This is the baseline, the foundation upon which all custodians are built. But within this brotherhood of individualistic warriors, there exist different shield hosts, each dedicated to a particular aspect of the Emperor's protection and the defense of Terra and the Imperium. Some shield hosts patrol the outer reaches of the Sol system, destroying threats before they can approach Terra. Others maintain vigilance over specific aspects of the Imperial Palace. Still others venture out into the galaxy on missions that serve the Emperor's will in ways both obvious and subtle. The Shadow Keepers were established with a very specific purpose. From among the custodians who stood watch over Terra in the earliest days of the Imperium, volunteers were sought for a duty unlike any other. These warriors would not stand in gleaming halls where pilgrims could see them and draw courage from their presence. They would not march in ceremonial processions or receive the adulation of crowds. They would descend into darkness and remain there for years, decades, even centuries at a time, guarding secrets that could never be shared, watching over horrors that could never be acknowledged to exist. The selection process for the Shadow Keepers has always been rigorous. Not every custodian possesses the temperament required for this duty. The psychological toll of spending extended periods in the dark cells is extreme even for warriors as mentally resilient as the Emperor's guardians. Some custodians, despite their formidable capabilities, find that they cannot endure the constant oppressive atmosphere of the cells, the unceasing sense of threat, the knowledge of what lurks behind each sealed portal. Those who volunteer for the Shadow Keepers must undergo additional training and conditioning beyond what all custodians receive. They are taught techniques for maintaining mental discipline during extended isolation. They learn the specific procedures for checking and maintaining the security systems of the dark cells. They memorize the layouts of all 81 levels, studying the defenses and containment systems of each cell, understanding not just how they work, but why they were designed in the specific ways they were. Perhaps most importantly, they are educated about what is contained within the cells. Not every detail, for some knowledge is too dangerous even for custodians, but enough that they understand the scale of the threat they guard against. They learn the history of various artifacts, where they came from, and what they are capable of. They are briefed on the nature of the entities imprisoned in the deepest cells, the specific dangers each one represents, the signs that might indicate a containment breach or weakness in the security systems. This education serves a dual purpose. First, it allows the Shadow Keepers to perform their duties effectively, giving them the knowledge they need to recognize and respond to any threat. Second, and perhaps more importantly, it reinforces their sense of purpose. When a Shadow Keeper stands watch in a dark corridor for hours, days, weeks at a time, knowing precisely what it is they are guarding against, understanding the catastrophic consequences that would follow if they failed in their duty, they are able to maintain their vigilance through even the most mentally taxing circumstances. The Shadow Keepers also differ from other shield hosts in their appearance and equipment. Where most custodians wear armor of gleaming gold auramite, a visual symbol of the Emperor's majesty and the glory of the Imperium, the Shadow Keepers wear armor of black. The auramite is treated with processes that turn it as dark as the void between stars, making these warriors seem to absorb light rather than reflect it. This serves a practical purpose in the dim lighting of the dark cells, where the gleaming gold of standard custodian armor would stand out too prominently. But it also serves a psychological function, marking these warriors as different, as set apart even from their fellow custodians. Over their black armor, Shadow Keepers wear robes and tabards of deep crimson, a color that stands in stark contrast to the darkness of their armor. The red fabric is rich and heavy, the color of dried blood or of loyalty tested beyond all reasonable limits. The combination of black armor and crimson cloth creates a striking visual that is both beautiful and deeply unsettling, marking these warriors as belonging to darkness and duty in equal measure. The weapons carried by Shadow Keepers are standard custodian arms, guardian spears, castellan axes, and other tools of war that have been perfected over millennia. But their leaders, particularly the shield captain, known as the Lock Warden, carry ancient weapons of mysterious origin. These are artifacts whose provenance is unclear even to the custodians themselves, weapons that were either created during the age of technology or gifted to the Emperor by sources he never revealed. They are tremendously powerful, capable of destroying threats that even standard custodian weapons might not be able to overcome. And they are intended as a last resort, to be used only if something from the dark cells manages to break free from its containment. The organization of the Shadow Keepers follows the standard structure of custodian shield hosts, with a shield captain at its head and numerous shield companies making up the full host. However, the internal dynamics are somewhat different from other hosts. Given the nature of their duty, Shadow Keepers spend much of their time in small groups or even alone, patrolling specific sections of the dark cells during shifts that can last for solar decades. They do not regularly train together as cohesive units, the way some other shield hosts do, because their primary mission is not large-scale warfare, but vigilant watching. This does not mean they lack combat capability. Every Shadow Keeper is still a custodian, still among the most formidable warriors humanity has ever produced. When they do deploy in force, whether to respond to a containment breach within the dark cells, or to venture out into the galaxy on a reclamation mission, they fight with all the skill and ferocity that defines the 10,000. but their expertise is particularly focused on close-quarters combat in confined spaces, on neutralizing threats with maximum efficiency in environments where collateral damage could trigger cascading failures of containment systems. The ranks within the Shadowkeepers include many custodian wardens, veterans who have proven themselves through centuries of service and taken on additional oaths of protection and duty. These wardens form the backbone of the host, the reliable core around which younger custodians are organized. Understanding the role of custodian wardens is essential to understanding how the Shadowkeepers function. The wardens, oaths, written in darkness. Within the Adeptus Custodes, a custodian warden represents a particular achievement in service and dedication. Not every custodian becomes a warden. The honor is offered only to those who have served for at least 5 centuries and who demonstrate not just martial excellence, but a particular strength of character that sets them apart, even among their already exceptional brothers. 500 years. Let that time frame settle in the mind for a moment. Most human civilizations do not endure for 5 centuries. Most human individuals live perhaps a century if they are fortunate, less in the hostile environment of the Imperium. But a custodian who has served for 500 years has seen empires rise and fall, has witnessed the deaths of countless billions, has endured experiences that would shatter the psyche of any normal human many times over. Yet they remain functional, alert, their dedication to duty undiminished by the weight of centuries. When a custodian reaches this milestone and is deemed worthy by their peers and superiors, they are offered the opportunity to become a warden. This is not automatic, not a simple promotion based on time served. The candidate must choose to accept the additional burden that comes with the rank, and that burden is significant. A custodian who accepts the role of warden must spend 1 full year in meditation and contemplation. They retire from active duty, withdraw from their shield company, and ascend to a location known as the Gallow Tower, a precipitous structure that rises above certain sections of the Imperial Palace. There, on ledges that would be perilous even for enhanced warriors, exposed to the elements and removed from the comfort of their usual environment, the candidate sits and thinks. What they think about is the nature of duty and protection. They contemplate what it means to be an immovable defender, to be a living fortress that no enemy can ever breach. They consider their own strengths and weaknesses, their fears and doubts, the moments in their long service where they failed or came close to failing. They examine their motivations, questioning whether their dedication to the Emperor is pure or tainted by other considerations. They think about death, about sacrifice, about what they are willing to endure in service to humanity. And during this year of contemplation, they compose a personal oath. This oath is not dictated by anyone else, not taken from a standard template or list of approved vows. Each warden's oath is unique to them, reflecting their own understanding of their duty, their own fears and aspirations, their own vision of what they must become to serve the Emperor properly. Some oaths are short, a single sentence that encapsulates a lifetime of service. Others are longer, detailing specific commitments and conditions under which the warden will act. But all warden oaths share certain characteristics. They are binding in a way that transcends mere words. To break their oath would be worse than death for a warden, a betrayal not just of the Emperor but of themselves, of everything they have dedicated their existence to becoming. The psychological weight of these oaths is such that they actually enhance the warden's capabilities. Their determination to uphold their vows bolsters their already formidable will to something of truly frightening intensity, allowing them to resist wounds and push through injuries that would incapacitate even another custodian. When the year is complete, when the oath has been finalized and committed to memory, the candidate returns from the Gallow Tower. In a private ceremony, they don the robes that mark their new station, heavy fabrics that denote their rank and their commitment. The robes of a warden are more elaborate than those worn by standard custodians, marked with symbols and sigils that represent centuries of service and the additional weight of their oath. From that moment forward, they are a custodian warden, a living embodiment of immovable defense. For the Shadowkeepers, this role takes on additional significance. The shield host includes a higher proportion of wardens than most other shield hosts, perhaps because the nature of their duty requires the kind of unwavering dedication that defines these veterans. When a warden of the Shadowkeepers stands watch in the dark cells, when they feel the oppressive weight of the imprisoned horrors pressing down on their consciousness, when whispers from entities that should not exist attempt to undermine their resolve, their personal oath becomes a bulwark against despair and madness. These oaths often reflect the specific challenges of guarding the dark cells. Some wardens of the Shadowkeepers vow never to turn away from their post, no matter what they see or hear, no matter how terrible the things that attempt to break through the barriers they guard. Others swear to remain vigilant, even unto death, to sacrifice their own existence if necessary, to prevent a single horror from escaping. Still others commit themselves to absolute secrecy, vowing that they will never speak of what they have witnessed, that the knowledge they carry will die with them, rather than being passed to others who might be corrupted or driven mad by it. The presence of so many wardens gives the Shadowkeepers a particular character. These are not young warriors eager to prove themselves, not newly appointed custodians still adjusting to the weight of their responsibility. These are veterans of centuries or even millennia, warriors who have endured more than most beings could imagine, who have committed themselves to a duty that offers no glory and little recognition. They are patient beyond measure, alert to the smallest details, capable of standing motionless for hours or days if their duty requires it. In combat, custodian wardens are distinguished by their preferred weapons. Many carry the Castellan axe, a massive power weapon that combines reach and devastating striking power. In the confined corridors of the dark cells, where space to maneuver is limited, these axes are particularly effective, allowing wardens to engage threats from a distance while delivering blows that can cleave through nearly any material. The weight and balance of these weapons is such that only warriors of superhuman strength and skill can wield them effectively, making them perfect for custodians, but useless in the hands of lesser beings. But it is not their weapons or armor that truly defines the wardens of the Shadowkeepers. It is their presence, the sense of absolute determination that radiates from them, the knowledge that they will not yield, that they have stood watch for centuries and will continue to stand watch for centuries more. When a warden takes up a position guarding a particular cell or corridor, it is as if they become part of the structure itself, as immovable as the walls, as enduring as the rock of terror that surrounds them. Yet all of these wardens, all of these centuries-old veterans who have proven themselves beyond question, answer to a single individual who bears a unique burden even among the Shadowkeepers. This is the Shield Captain, who holds the title of Lockwarden, the master of the dark cells, the keeper of secrets that even other custodians do not know. The Lockwarden, master of terrible secrets. In the hierarchy of the Adeptus Custodes, Shield Captains hold positions of significant authority and responsibility. Each leads a shield company or shield host, directing the actions of their warriors and making tactical decisions during operations. They are chosen from among the most capable custodians, those who have demonstrated not just martial excellence but strategic acumen, leadership capability, and the judgment necessary to make difficult decisions under pressure. But among all shield captains, there is one whose burden exceeds all others. The Lockwarden, the shield captain who leads the Shadowkeepers, bears responsibilities that are unique within the Adeptus Custodes. This is not merely a military command position. It is a role that carries weight beyond anything that can be measured in terms of troops commanded or victories achieved. The title of Lockwarden is not held lightly. It confers upon its bearer responsibilities that many would consider impossible for any being to fulfill. The Lockwarden is the ultimate authority on all matters related to the dark cells. They alone know the full inventory of what is contained within all 81 levels, They possess the complete set of physical keys that can open the rune-locked portals, keys that are never removed from their person, that they guard more carefully than they guard their own life. They know the psychic codes and spoken words of power that must accompany the use of those keys to successfully open any cell. More than this, the Lock Warden is responsible for the security protocols surrounding the dark cells. They determine the rotation schedule for the Shadow Keepers who stand watch, deciding who is assigned to guard which sections and for how long. They oversee the maintenance performed by tech priests from the Adeptus Mechanicus, who are allowed limited access through a service entrance called the Door of Cogs to maintain the technological aspects of the containment systems. They conduct regular inspections of the security measures, checking for any signs of degradation or weakness that might compromise containment. Perhaps most importantly, when a new artifact or entity is discovered that requires imprisonment in the dark cells, or when something manages to escape from the cells and must be recaptured, it is the Lock Warden who personally oversees the operation. This is not delegation to subordinates. This is direct, personal involvement at every stage. The Lock Warden determines which cell is appropriate for a new addition to the prison, oversees the construction of new containment measures if needed, and ensures that the artifact or entity is properly secured before sealing the cell. The current holder of this position is Shield Captain Borsa Thirsk, who has served as Lock Warden for a century and a half. To understand the Shadow Keepers, one must understand something of this individual, for his character shapes the shield host he leads. Borsa Thirsk is described in Imperial records as grim and frighteningly intense, a warrior whose utter fearlessness and steely vigilance make him ideal for his role. Those who have interacted with him speak of a being who seems to radiate an aura of absolute seriousness, whose every word and gesture carries weight, who approaches every aspect of his duty with a focus that borders on obsessive. He is not known for humor or levity. Such things have no place in the depths of the dark cells, and Thirsk has spent so much of his life there that he seems to have internalized their atmosphere. His appearance reflects his role. The armor he wears is the deepest black, so dark that it seems to absorb light, making him difficult to see even in well-lit environments. His crimson robes are marked with sigils that represent his rank and his centuries of service, symbols whose meaning is known only to other custodians. He carries an ancient weapon, one of those mysterious artifacts whose origin predates even the Imperium, a tool of war so powerful that it is kept ready only for the ultimate emergency, to be used if something from the deepest cells manages to break free. Before he became Lock Warden, Borsa Thirsk had already served the Emperor for centuries. He had fought in countless engagements, had proven himself in ways that earned him recognition even among his fellow custodians. But when the previous Lock Warden fell in battle or retired from his position, Thirsk was selected as the successor. And his life changed fundamentally from that moment. For the first century and a half of his tenure as Lock Warden, Thirsk rarely left Terra. During all those decades, he departed the homeworld only twice, both times for missions of such importance that his personal involvement was deemed absolutely necessary. The rest of the time, he remained in or near the dark cells, maintaining his constant vigil, overseeing the Shadow Keepers, ensuring that the prison remained secure. The psychological cost of this dedication is difficult for outsiders to comprehend. Imagine spending a century and a half in proximity to the dark cells, knowing every moment of every day that a single mistake, a single lapse in vigilance could result in catastrophe. Imagine the weight of the secrets Thirsk carries, the knowledge of what lurks behind each sealed portal, the understanding that if he were to fall or be corrupted, there would be no one else who possesses the complete information necessary to maintain the containment systems. Yet Thirsk has never shown signs of weakness or doubt. His determination remains absolute, his dedication unshaken despite the burden he carries. When he walks the corridors of the dark cells, the Shadow Keepers who serve under him take heart from his presence. drawing strength from the knowledge that their leader is there with them, sharing the psychological weight of their duty. But all of this changed when the Great Rift opened across the galaxy. For 10,000 years, the Shadowkeepers had maintained their vigil with remarkable consistency. Generations of Lockwardens had come and gone, passing the burden from one to another, but the duty itself remained constant. The dark cells held their prisoners secure. The Wardens stood watch in silence. The terrible secrets of the Age of Strife and the Age of Technology remained locked away, safe from those who might misuse them or be corrupted by them. Then everything changed in a single catastrophic moment. The Great Rift, when prisons failed. In the wake of the 13th Black Crusade, when the Chaos Warmaster Abaddon the Despoiler finally achieved his long-sought victory over the fortress world of Cadia, the galaxy itself was torn asunder. The fall of Cadia and the destruction of the ancient pylons that had held back the Eye of Terror for 10 millennia resulted in a tear in reality known as the Great Rift, or the Cicatrix Maledictum. This massive warp storm split the Imperium nearly in half, rendering warp travel and communication across the divide nearly impossible. The effects of the Great Rift were felt across the galaxy. Worlds were consumed by warp storms, their populations driven mad or killed by demonic invasions. The light of the Astronomicon, that psychic beacon that allows navigators to guide ships through the warp, flickered and died across vast regions of space, leaving countless vessels lost in the immaterium. Chaos warbands poured forth from the Eye of Terror and other warp rifts, launching attacks on imperial worlds that had not seen war in millennia. Terra itself was not spared. The Astronomicon went dark for a period known as the Noctis Aeterna, or the Blackness, which on Terra lasted slightly over a month. During this time, the psychic light that had shone from the Golden Throne for 10,000 years was extinguished, plunging the throne world into a darkness more profound than any mere absence of physical light. Warp energies began manifesting directly on the planet's surface, triggering widespread riots, madness, and desperation among Terra's teeming billions. The Imperial Palace became a fortress under siege, though the attackers were not external enemies, but the planet's own population, driven to insanity by the spiritual darkness and the whispers of chaos that filled the void left by the Emperor's light. Chaos cults that had operated in secret for years or decades chose this moment to reveal themselves, openly recruiting from the desperate masses. Even within the palace's outer precincts, there were disturbances that required the deployment of custodians to suppress. For the Shadowkeepers, the opening of the Great Rift was catastrophic in ways that went beyond even the terrible events occurring on Terra's surface. Deep in the dark cells, in those chambers where the most horrific entities were imprisoned, something unprecedented happened. The warp energies released by the birth of the Great Rift resonated through the barriers that held these beings, weakening the wards and rune locks that had contained them for millennia. The first indication of disaster came from the custodians who were on watch in the deeper levels when the Great Rift opened. They reported feeling a sudden surge of psychic pressure, a wave of malevolent energy that crashed through the corridors like a physical force. Alarms began sounding throughout the facility as containment systems reported stress levels approaching critical thresholds. The Shadowkeepers rushed to their posts, preparing to reinforce the barriers if needed, readying themselves for whatever might emerge from the cells. But even as they moved to respond to the internal crisis, word came from the surface that Terra itself was under attack. Demonic forces were pouring into the Imperial Palace, assaulting the Lion's Gate, one of the primary entrances to the palace complex. Every available custodian was being called to defend against this external threat. Captain General Trajan Valoris, the supreme commander of the Adeptus Custodes, was marshalling forces to meet the invasion. Lockwarden Borsa Thursk faced an impossible choice. The dark cells required the full strength of the Shadowkeepers to maintain security during this crisis. But the Empire needed every custodian who could fight to defend against the demonic invasion. To abandon the cells was to risk whatever was happening in the depths. To remain was to potentially allow demons to breach the Imperial Palace and threaten the Emperor himself. Thirsk made the only decision his oath would allow. He ordered the majority of the Shadow Keepers to deploy to the surface, to join in the defense of the palace against the demonic horde. Only a handful of custodians remained behind to watch over the dark cells, barely enough to maintain patrols through the most critical sections of the facility. It was a calculated risk, a desperate gamble that the containment systems would hold long enough for the external threat to be dealt with and for the Shadow Keepers to return to their posts. The Battle of Lion's Gate was a desperate affair. 88 cohorts of bloodletters, led by 8 massive bloodthirsters, assaulted the palace, supported by the maddened hordes of chaos cultists who had taken over large sections of Terra's hive cities. The palace's defenses, despite 10,000 years of maintenance and preparation, were strained to their limits. Captain General Valoris led nearly 4,000 custodians into battle, alongside contingents of Grey Knights, Sisters of Silence, and whatever other forces could be marshaled. The fighting was fierce beyond measure. Demons and custodians clashed in battles that raged through corridors and across ramparts. The blood of both mortal defenders and immortal demons stained the ancient stones of the palace. For hours, the outcome hung in balance, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. Salvation came in the form of Reboot Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, who had recently been revived from the stasis that had preserved him for 10 millennia. Fresh from his own battles on Luna, Guilliman led a counterattack of Primaris Space Marines, Standard Space Marines, Custodians, and Sisters of Silence that broke the demonic advance before it could reach the Eternity Gate, the threshold beyond which lay the Sanctum Imperialis and the Golden Throne itself. The demons were driven back and ultimately banished, their manifestation in real space ended by the combined might of the Imperial defenders. Horn, the Chaos God who had launched this attack in a bid to prove his superiority over the other dark powers, was so enraged by this failure that he obliterated the 8 bloodthirsters who had led the assault, destroying them utterly as punishment for their defeat. But while the Battle of Lion's Gate ended in victory for the Imperium, when Borsa Thirsk and the Shadow Keepers returned to the dark cells, they found disaster waiting for them. Cells stand empty. The few custodians who had remained behind to guard the dark cells during the battle were found dead. Not simply killed, but torn apart, their auramite armor rent and broken, their weapons scattered across corridors that showed signs of terrible violence. These were warriors whose individual combat prowess exceeded that of entire armies, yet something had overcome them, destroyed them utterly despite everything they were capable of. As Thirsk led the returning Shadow Keepers deeper into the facility, they began to discover cells that stood open, their rune-locked portals breached, their containment systems deactivated or destroyed. In some cases, there were signs of violence, evidence that whatever had been imprisoned had fought its way free. In other cases, the cells simply stood empty, with no indication of how their occupants had escaped or where they had gone. The full inventory of what had escaped was initially difficult to determine. Some cells had been empty for unknown periods, their occupants having fled the moment the containment weakened. Others showed signs of recent escape, suggesting their inhabitants had been the ones to kill the Shadowkeeper guards before departing. Still others were found in states that suggested something had pulled their contents out from outside, as if some force had reached through the warp itself to claim what was imprisoned there. What was certain was that artifacts and entities of terrible power were no longer contained. Things that the Emperor himself had deemed too dangerous to exist openly in the galaxy, horrors that had been kept locked away for 10,000 years, were now loose. Some had vanished into the warp, perhaps pulled back through the same tears in reality that had allowed demons to invade Terra. Others had gone to ground somewhere on Terra itself, hiding among the hive cities or in the wilderness regions between population centers. Still others had found their way off-world, departing the Sol system for destinations unknown. For Borsa Thirsk, this was a failure of responsibility beyond anything he could have imagined. For a century and a half, he had maintained perfect security over the dark cells. Now, in a single catastrophic event triggered by forces completely outside his control, that security had been breached. The prison he had devoted his existence to guarding had been opened, its most dangerous contents scattered across the galaxy. Yet Thirsk did not break under the weight of this failure. Instead, he made another decision, one that would fundamentally change the nature of the Shadowkeeper's mission. If the dark cells could no longer be relied upon to hold their contents secure, if the warp energies unleashed by the Great Rift had made it possible for imprisoned entities to escape, then the prison alone was not enough. The Shadowkeepers would have to become hunters as well as wardens. For the first time since their formation during the unification of Terra, the Shadowkeepers would deploy forces into the galaxy in significant numbers, not merely the handful of custodians who might venture out on specific missions, but entire companies of warriors, equipped and prepared for extended operations far from Terra. Their mission would be to track down everything that had escaped from the dark cells, to recapture or destroy these horrors, and to bring them back to imprisonment before they could cause the kind of catastrophe that their existence represented. The remaining Shadowkeepers on Terra would continue their traditional duty, maintaining watch over the cells that remained secure, repairing and reinforcing containment systems that had been damaged or weakened. But a significant portion of the shield host would now be dedicated to reclamation operations, hunting across the galaxy for escaped threats. Borsa Thirsk himself took to the field for these operations. After spending a century and a half rarely leaving Terra, the Lock Warden now found himself traveling to distant worlds, following leads and traces of the escaped horrors, personally overseeing missions to recapture or neutralize them. It speaks volumes about the dire condition of the galaxy and the severity of this crisis that Thirsk left Terra repeatedly, something he had done only twice in all his previous tenure as Lock Warden. The transition from Eternal Watcher to Active Hunter represented a profound shift for the Shadowkeepers. For 10,000 years, their duty had been fundamentally passive, a matter of standing watch, maintaining vigilance, ensuring nothing escaped. Now they had to become active participants in conflicts across the galaxy, seeking out threats rather than waiting for threats to come to them. This required different skills, different tactics, different mindsets. The Shadowkeepers had always been capable warriors, as all custodians are, but their expertise had been focused on close-quarters combat in the confined spaces of the dark cells. Now they needed to operate in environments as diverse as the galaxy itself, from urban hive cities to wilderness regions to abandoned space hulks drifting through the void. They adapted with the flexibility that defines all custodians. Strike forces were assembled, each one built around a core of veteran wardens who provided stability and experience. Younger custodians were included to provide additional combat power and to learn from the veterans. Each force was equipped for independent operation, capable of sustaining themselves for extended periods without resupply or reinforcement. The missions they undertook were among the most dangerous and sensitive operations in the entire Imperium. Many of the escaped artifacts and entities were not things that could be confronted directly in open combat. They required careful planning, precise execution, and sometimes strategies that seemed counterintuitive or even mad to outside observers. The Shadowkeepers adapted their tactics to each target, drawing on millennia of combined experience to find ways to contain and neutralize threats that had defied imprisonment before. And always, absolutely always, these operations were conducted in total secrecy. The wider Imperium could not be allowed to know that the dark cells had been breached, could not be permitted to learn that horrors from the Age of Strife and the Age of Technology were now loose in the galaxy. Such knowledge would cause panic, might trigger investigations, that would reveal secrets better left buried. The Shadow Keepers moved in darkness, even when operating in the light, their true purpose hidden beneath cover stories and misdirection. One of the first major operations undertaken by the Shadow Keepers after the Great Rift opened was a deployment to the ruins of Cadia, the fortress world that had been destroyed during the 13th Black Crusade. This mission was ordered personally by Captain General Trajan Valoris, the supreme commander of the Adeptus Custodes, suggesting that something of critical importance had been detected among the wreckage of that shattered planet. What exactly the Shadow Keepers sought on Cadia has never been revealed to those outside their ranks. The official records mention only that a force of Shadow Keepers deployed to the Cadian system and operated there for an extended period before returning to Terra. But those who have studied the history of the Dark Cells and the nature of what was imprisoned there can make educated guesses. Cadia was home to ancient pylons, structures created by the Necrons in ages past, which had the capability to stabilize reality and suppress warp activity. When these pylons were destroyed in Abaddon's assault, the result was the opening of the Great Rift. It is possible that something imprisoned in the Dark Cells was connected to these pylons, perhaps a piece of Necron technology that had been studied during the Age of Technology, or an entity that had been contained specifically because of its connection to the ancient structures. Whatever the Shadow Keepers sought on Cadia, whatever they encountered among the ruins of that fortress world, the mission was deemed sufficiently important that the Lock Warden himself was involved in planning and possibly in execution. The forces committed to this operation returned to Terra after their mission was complete, bringing with them something that was immediately transported to the Dark Cells for renewed imprisonment. Other operations were launched across the galaxy, each one targeting a specific escaped artifact or entity. Some of these missions were concluded quickly, with the Shadow Keepers locating and securing their target within days or weeks. Others dragged on for months or even years, requiring patient investigation and careful tracking to finally corner their quarry. One such extended operation involved tracking something that had been designated only as Subject 17 in the Dark Cells records. This entity had been imprisoned on the 58th level, contained within a chamber that required continuous psychic reinforcement to prevent it from phasing out of normal reality. When the Great Rift opened, the psychic disruption weakened these containment fields just enough for Subject 17 to escape, slipping through barriers that had held it for 8,000 years. The Shadow Keeper strike force, assigned to recapture Subject 17, spent 14 months following traces of its passage across 3 star systems. The entity left behind characteristic signs wherever it manifested, technology that had been partially converted into organic matter, personnel who reported experiencing memories of lives they had never lived, spatial distortions that persisted for weeks after the entity departed. Each incident provided clues to Subject 17's capabilities and movement patterns, allowing the Shadow Keepers to gradually narrow down possible locations where it might manifest next. The hunt required not just martial prowess, but investigative skill. Shadow Keepers interviewed witnesses, examined affected sites with sophisticated scanning equipment, consulted with tech priests, and sanctioned psychers to better understand what they were dealing with. They had to operate carefully, maintaining cover stories that explained their presence without revealing the true nature of their mission. To local Imperial authorities, they presented themselves as investigating reports of warp anomalies on behalf of the Captain General, a plausible enough explanation that did not invite deeper questions. The final confrontation occurred on a forge world in the Segmentum Obscurus, where Subject 17 had manifested within a manufacturing complex, attempting to convert an entire production line into something that existed partially in real space and partially in the warp. The Shadow Keepers had only hours to respond before the conversion reached a point where it could not be reversed, where the affected machinery would become a permanent gateway for entities from the Imperium. The strike force, led by a custodian warden named Gaheris Orthax, entered the facility through service tunnels, moving with speed that belied their heavy armor. They found the manufacturing complex transformed into something from nightmare, where solid metal flowed like water and machinery moved with purposes of its own, where the angles between surfaces hurt to look at directly and sounds echoed with overtones that should not exist. Subject 17 itself manifested as a shifting form that seemed to occupy multiple locations simultaneously, a presence that was felt more than seen, an awareness that pressed down on the consciousness of anyone who approached it. The entity attempted communication, speaking in voices that came from everywhere and nowhere, offering knowledge and power in exchange for freedom, promising revelations that would elevate those who listened to planes of existence beyond mortal comprehension. The Shadow Keepers ignored these offers, as they had been trained to do. They deployed specialized containment equipment they had carried from Terra, devices that created zones of stabilized reality, forcing Subject 17 to coalesce into a more singular form. Guardian spears crackled with power as they were thrust into the entity's manifestation, not to kill it, but to weaken it, to drain the energies that allowed it to exist partially outside normal space. The battle lasted 7 hours. During that time, 3 Shadow Keepers fell, their armor breached by attacks that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions, their enhanced bodies unable to heal wounds that technically had not been inflicted in normal space-time. But the remainder persisted, gradually forcing Subject 17 back into the containment field, sealing it within a portable prison that would hold it long enough to return it to Terra and the Dark Cells. The manufacturing complex had to be destroyed afterward, every piece of affected machinery broken down to its component atoms and scattered. The workers who had been present during Subject 17's manifestation required extensive memory modification. Their recollections of events altered to prevent psychological trauma and to remove any knowledge of what they had witnessed. The Shadow Keepers conducted these sanitization procedures with the same thoroughness they applied to all their operations, ensuring no trace remained of what had occurred. This pattern repeated across numerous operations. On a death world in the Eastern Fringe, Shadow Keepers tracked an escaped artifact that had been discovered by an Orc warhorde, recovering it only after exterminating the entire greenskin presence on the planet to ensure no Xenos survived who might remember what they had briefly possessed. On a cardinal world in Segmentum Solar, they intercepted a Dark Mechanicus cult that had somehow learned of an artifact's location, destroying the cultists and their blasphemous research before they could attempt to use what they had found. Some missions required more subtle approaches. When an Inquisitor of the Ordo Xenos acquired an artifact from the Dark Cells without realizing what it was, believing it to be simply an interesting xenotech specimen, the Shadow Keepers could not simply eliminate an Inquisitor without causing diplomatic incidents that would draw unwanted attention. Instead, they arranged for the artifact to be lost during a raid on the Inquisitor's facility by supposed heretics, then recovered it during the subsequent investigation. The Inquisitor never knew that the carefully orchestrated theft had been conducted by custodians specifically to retrieve the artifact, believing instead that she had been unfortunate enough to be targeted by heretics who happened to know about her collection. Not all operations were successful. Some artifacts were lost permanently, either destroyed by those who possessed them, or transported beyond the reach of Imperial space by Xenos raiders or Chaos forces. Some entities managed to evade capture, slipping away just as the Shadow Keepers closed in, disappearing into the warp or into hidden dimensions where they could not be followed. Each failure weighed heavily on the Shadow Keepers, reminders that despite their formidable capabilities, they were not infallible, that the horrors released from the Dark Cells posed challenges even they could not always overcome. The losses taken during these operations were significant. Shadow Keepers fell in combat against escaped entities whose powers exceeded anything they had trained against Chaos Marines who fought with the fury of the damned, against Xenos whose technologies proved capable of breaching even Auramite armor. Each fallen warrior was mourned by their brothers, their names added to the memorial walls in the dark cells, their sacrifice acknowledged even if it could never be publicly recognized. Yet despite losses and failures, the Shadow Keepers persisted in their expanded mission. Each recovered artifact was returned to the dark cells and imprisoned anew, its containment measures strengthened to prevent another escape. Each entity that was recaptured or destroyed represented one less threat to the Imperium, one less nightmare that might corrupt or destroy entire worlds. The work was endless, thankless, and absolutely necessary, and the Shadow Keepers pursued it with the same dedication they had always shown in their traditional role as wardens. In some cases, the Shadow Keepers arrived too late, finding that the artifact or entity they sought had already been claimed by someone else. Chaos warbands, Orc warlords, Dark Eldar raiders, rogue tech priests, all of these and more sought ancient power, and some managed to acquire items that had escaped from the dark cells. In these situations, the Shadow Keepers had to not only retrieve what had been taken, but also eliminate everyone who had come into contact with it, ensuring no knowledge of its existence could spread. The necessity for total secrecy sometimes put the Shadow Keepers into conflict with other Imperial forces. Inquisitors investigating strange phenomena, Space Marine chapters responding to threats, even other custodians operating on different missions. All these could potentially interfere with Shadow Keeper operations or stumble upon information that needed to remain hidden. Managing these interactions required careful diplomacy and, when diplomacy failed, the willingness to use authority and, if necessary, force to ensure compliance. One recorded incident involved a Shadow Keeper strike force intercepting an inquisitorial investigation into reports of a strange artifact that had appeared on an Imperial world. The Inquisitor, believing herself to be operating with full authority to investigate any potential threat to the Imperium, was surprised when Custodians appeared and demanded she turn over all information and abandon her investigation immediately. When she protested, citing her rank and authority, the Shadow Keeper leading the force calmly explained that this was not negotiable, that the artifact in question fell under Custodian jurisdiction, and that any further interference would be treated as obstruction of the Emperor's direct will. The Inquisitor, recognizing that even her authority could not override that of the Custodians, complied, though not without resentment. Such incidents became more common as the Shadow Keepers expanded their operations across the galaxy, creating tension between different branches of Imperial authority. But the Shadow Keepers never wavered in their insistence on complete control over operations involving artifacts from the Dark Cells, and their authority was ultimately recognized and respected, if not always willingly. As the Shadow Keepers adapted to their new role as hunters and reclaimers, they also provided assistance to other Imperial forces in ways that would have been unthinkable before the Great Rift. During the Indomitus Crusade, the massive campaign launched by Roboute Guilliman to stabilize the Imperium after the catastrophe of the Great Rift, the Shadow Keepers made an unprecedented decision. The Phalanx, the massive fortress monastery that served as the mobile base of the Imperial Fist's Space Marine chapter, had been severely damaged during the battles that raged across the Imperium. This ancient vessel, one of the largest spacecraft in Imperial service, was in danger of becoming permanently disabled, unable to fulfill its role in the Crusade. The Imperial Fists lacked the technology to effect complete repairs. The systems damaged were too ancient, too complex, built using knowledge from the dark age of technology that had been lost. But that knowledge had not been entirely lost. Some of it was preserved in the dark cells, locked away because it was deemed too dangerous to be widely available, but still extant, still potentially useful in dire circumstances. After careful consideration, and with the approval of Captain General Valoris and likely Roboute Guilliman himself, the Shadow Keepers made the decision to open one of the dark cells and provide the Imperial Fists with the technology they needed to restore the Phalanx. This action demonstrates both the pragmatism of the Shadow Keepers and the flexibility they developed after the Great Rift. In earlier times, the very suggestion of opening a cell to provide its contents to outsiders, even to loyalist space marines, would have been rejected without consideration. The dark cells existed to keep dangerous things locked away, not to be used as a technological repository for the benefit of the Imperium at large. But the opening of the Great Rift had changed everything. If some cells could no longer be relied upon to hold their contents, if the very nature of the warp had shifted in ways that made containment more difficult, then perhaps the rigid adherence to total secrecy needed to be reconsidered in some cases. If technology locked in the dark cells could be used to support critical Imperial operations, and if that use could be carefully controlled to prevent wider dissemination of the knowledge, then perhaps the risk was acceptable. The fact that the Shadow Keepers were willing to take this action, and that they successfully provided the technology while maintaining security over its use, demonstrates their evolution from pure wardens to something more complex. They remained guardians of terrible secrets, but they had learned to balance their duty to contain with the recognition that in some circumstances, carefully controlled release of that which they guarded could serve the greater good. Yet this flexibility had limits. The Shadow Keepers never forgot what they were, fundamentally. Jailers watching over a prison that held humanity's nightmares. Every operation they conducted, every artifact they retrieved, every entity they recaptured, all of it was ultimately in service to their primary mission of ensuring that the worst horrors of the past remained contained and controlled. The burden of terrible knowledge. To be a Shadow Keeper is to carry knowledge that cannot be shared, to witness things that cannot be spoken of, to understand truths that would drive most beings mad. This psychological burden is perhaps the greatest challenge these warriors face, greater even than the physical dangers of their duty or the combat operations they undertake. Consider what a Shadow Keeper knows. They are aware of the existence of technological marvels and horrors that the Imperium officially denies ever existed. They have stood within meters of entities whose very existence violates everything humanity understands about the nature of reality. They have read reports and dossiers detailing the capabilities of weapons that could sterilize entire star systems, the results of genetic experiments that produced beings of godlike power and total insanity, the outcomes of research into dimensions that should not exist. This knowledge is corrosive in a way that physical injuries are not. A wound to the body heals, given time and medical attention, even for beings as durable as custodians. But knowledge, once gained, cannot be erased from the mind. A Shadow Keeper who has learned what lurks behind a particular sealed portal, who has read the reports of what that entity did before it was captured, carries that knowledge forever. There is no forgetting, no reprieve, no way to unknow what has been learned. The psychological weight of this knowledge is compounded by the isolation it creates. Shadow Keepers cannot share what they know with those outside their ranks. They cannot seek counsel or support from other custodians who have not been briefed on the contents of the dark cells. They cannot even discuss with each other the full scope of what they guard, because each Shadow Keeper is typically briefed only on the sections of the dark cells they are responsible for watching. This compartmentalization of information is a security measure, intended to prevent any single custodian from knowing everything about the dark cells, and thus being unable to compromise the entire facility if they were to be captured or corrupted. But it also means that the isolation experienced by Shadow Keepers is profound even within their own shield host. Each warrior carries their own subset of terrible secrets, unable to fully share the burden with anyone else. The only individual who knows everything is the Lock Warden, and the weight this places on that individual is almost unimaginable. Borsa Thirsk carries in his mind a complete inventory of everything contained in all 81 levels of the dark cells. He knows the history of each artifact, the nature of each imprisoned entity, the specific threats each one represents. He understands the interconnections between different items, knows which artifacts cannot be stored near each other because their interaction might weaken containment, is aware of which entities have attempted communication with their guards and what they said. This complete knowledge makes Thirsk perhaps the most burdened individual in the entire Imperium, with the possible exception of the Emperor himself. Yet he has borne this weight for a century and a half without breaking, without showing any sign of the madness or corruption that such knowledge might induce in lesser beings. His strength of will and dedication to duty allow him to function despite carrying secrets that would shatter most minds. For the shadow keepers beneath him, the burden is somewhat less, but still crushing. A custodian standing watch in a corridor knows what lurks behind the sealed portals nearby. They know the history of those artifacts or entities, know what would happen if containment failed. They stand there, shift after shift, sometimes for decades without relief, holding their position against a threat that tests them mentally far more than physically. The constant proximity to such profound wrongness takes a toll. Even custodians whose minds are fortified beyond anything normal humans can achieve are not immune to psychological stress. The oppressive atmosphere of the dark cells, the sense of malevolence that permeates the air, the occasional whispers from entities that can project their consciousness beyond their cells. All of this wears away at mental defenses in ways that are subtle but cumulative. Shadowkeepers develop coping mechanisms to deal with this. Some turn to meditation, using mental disciplines learned during their training to maintain psychological balance. Others focus obsessively on the technical details of their duty, checking and rechecking security systems, performing maintenance tasks with meticulous precision, using routine and structure to create a sense of control in an environment that constantly threatens to overwhelm them. Many Shadowkeepers compose poetry or write philosophical treatises during their off-duty hours, attempting to process and externalize the existential dread that comes from their duty. These writings are kept private, never shared outside the shield host, but they serve as a release valve for psychological pressure that would otherwise have no outlet. Some of these works are remarkably profound, meditations on duty and sacrifice that rival the writings of the greatest imperial philosophers, though they will never be read by anyone beyond the Shadowkeepers themselves. The custodian wardens within the Shadowkeepers often serve as anchors for younger custodians struggling with the psychological weight of their duty. When a newly assigned Shadowkeeper begins to show signs of stress, experiencing difficulty sleeping or maintaining focus, the wardens recognize these symptoms and intervene. They speak with the younger warrior, sharing their own experiences, offering perspective that comes from centuries of successfully managing the same burdens. These conversations are brief and pragmatic, for custodians are not given to lengthy emotional discussions, but they are effective. A warden might say something as simple as, "I have stood watch in these halls for 7 centuries. The weight never lessens, but you grow strong enough to bear it. Focus on your oath. Remember why you chose this duty." These few words, coming from a warrior who has proven their ability to endure, can make the difference between a Shadowkeeper who adapts and one who requests reassignment to a different shield host. Reassignment does happen, though it is rare. The Shadowkeepers recognize that not every custodian is suited for the particular psychological challenges of their duty. There is no shame in a warrior who has served in the dark cells for a century or two requesting transfer to a different shield host. Such requests are granted, though with strict conditions. The transferring custodian must undergo psychic conditioning to suppress their memories of the specific details they learned about the dark cells, retaining only general knowledge that their duty required them to guard dangerous artifacts and entities without remembering the specifics. This memory suppression is not perfect, and deliberately so. The conditioning is designed to fade over time, meaning that a custodian who is transferred away from the Shadowkeepers will eventually recover their suppressed memories, but only after centuries have passed, by which time the specific information they possessed will hopefully be outdated or less sensitive. This approach balances security concerns with respect for the warriors who served in the dark cells, acknowledging that their sacrifice deserves to be remembered by them, even as it cannot be shared with others. But most Shadow Keepers never request reassignment. They accept the psychological burden as part of their duty, endure it as they endure everything else, and continue their watch year after year, decade after decade, sometimes for centuries at a time. They become, in a very real sense, part of the dark cells themselves, as permanent and enduring as the wards and locks that seal the cells. When a Shadow Keeper finally falls in battle or succumbs to the gradual degradation that even custodians eventually experience, their passing is marked with ceremonies that are both solemn and private. Other shield hosts might celebrate the lives of fallen warriors with public memorials, allowing the wider Imperium to know of their sacrifice. The Shadow Keepers conduct their remembrances in secret, in chambers deep within the dark cells themselves, where only other Shadow Keepers are present to witness. These ceremonies acknowledge not just the fallen warriors' combat achievements, but also the centuries they spent standing watch in darkness, the psychological weight they carried, the secrets they kept. The deceased is honored for their vigilance as much as for their valor, for their patience as much as for their prowess. Their name is inscribed on memorial walls hidden in the depths of the dark cells, where only Shadow Keepers will ever see it, a record of service that the wider Imperium will never know about. This anonymity, this lack of public recognition, is perhaps the final burden that Shadow Keepers bear. Other custodians may achieve fame, may have their names inscribed in histories that will be read across the Imperium, may be remembered for millennia as exemplars of what the Emperor's guardians should be. Shadow Keepers serve in silence and are remembered in silence, their sacrifices known only to their brothers, their deeds recorded only in classified archives that will never be open to the public. Yet they do not serve for recognition. They serve because the Emperor decreed that the dark cells must be guarded, because the horrors imprisoned there cannot be allowed to escape, because if they were to fail in their duty, the consequences could be catastrophic for all humanity. This is enough. This has always been enough. For 10,000 years, it has been enough. The Eternal Watch continues. In the current era, the Shadow Keepers face challenges that test them in ways their predecessors never had to endure. The opening of the Great Rift fundamentally changed the nature of their duty, transforming them from purely defensive guardians into active hunters who must range across a galaxy torn by war and chaos. The cells they guard have proven vulnerable in ways that were never anticipated, forcing them to adapt their security measures and protocols to account for threats that can manifest from within the warp itself. Yet despite these challenges, despite the expanded scope of their mission and the new demands placed upon them, the Shadow Keepers remain true to their fundamental purpose. They are the wardens of humanity's darkest secrets, the keepers of horrors that must never be allowed to threaten the Imperium. Whether they stand watch in the corridors of the dark cells or hunt escaped artifacts across distant worlds, they fulfill this purpose with the same unwavering dedication that has defined them since their founding. The structure of their organization has evolved to meet new needs. Where once nearly all Shadow Keepers were stationed on Terra, maintaining constant patrols through the dark cells, now the shield host is divided between those who remain at their traditional posts and those who deploy across the galaxy on reclamation missions. This division of forces creates new challenges in terms of coordination and command, but the Shadow Keepers have adapted with the flexibility that defines all custodians. Communications between deployed forces and Terra are maintained through carefully encrypted channels, using codes and ciphers that are changed regularly to prevent interception. Shadow Keeper strike forces operating in distant regions report their progress and request guidance on complex situations, while the command structure on Terra coordinates multiple simultaneous operations. and prioritizes targets based on threat assessment and opportunity. The Lock Warden remains the ultimate authority, though Borsa Thirsk has delegated some operational control to senior shield captains and custodian wardens who lead the various strike forces. This delegation is necessary given the scale of operations now being conducted, but Thirsk maintains oversight of all major decisions and personally approves every plan that involves significant risk or potential exposure of Shadowkeeper activities to outside observation. The equipment and resources available to the Shadowkeepers have been expanded to support their new operational profile. Where once they required primarily defensive weapons and monitoring equipment suitable for close-quarters patrol in the dark cells, they now need a full range of military hardware capable of supporting extended operations in any environment. Shadowkeeper strike forces deploy with their own transport craft, communication systems, specialized containment equipment for securing captured artifacts or entities, and support personnel, including tech priests and servitors, who have been mind-wiped and psychically conditioned to prevent them from retaining any memory of what they witness during operations. The psychological profile of Shadowkeepers has also evolved. Custodians selected for the shield host must now demonstrate not just the mental fortitude necessary to endure the oppressive atmosphere of the dark cells, but also the adaptability required for extended operations in the galaxy at large. They must be capable of transitioning from the patient vigilance of the Watcher to the aggressive action of the Hunter, able to operate effectively in both roles without becoming too specialized in either. Training regimens have been updated to reflect these new requirements. Shadowkeepers now regularly practice combat scenarios that simulate operations in diverse environments, from urban warfare in hive cities to void combat aboard space vessels, to wilderness survival on hostile worlds. They train in techniques for tracking and locating specific targets across vast distances, using investigative methods that combine advanced technology with traditional methods of information gathering and analysis. Perhaps most importantly, they train in operational security and counterintelligence, learning how to conduct missions without revealing their true nature or allowing witnesses to understand what is actually being sought or captured. A Shadowkeeper strike force might present themselves as operating under a variety of cover stories, conducting an inquisitorial investigation, responding to a request for custodian assistance from local Imperial authorities, pursuing a separate objective entirely. The true nature of their mission remains hidden beneath layers of misdirection and plausible deniability. Despite these changes and adaptations, the core of what makes a Shadowkeeper remains unchanged. These are warriors who have accepted a burden that few could bear, who willingly embrace duty that offers no glory and demands constant sacrifice. They are custodians who chose to turn away from the light of the Emperor's presence, to descend into darkness and stand watch over nightmares, to carry secrets that isolate them from their brothers and knowledge that weighs upon their souls. They are the most secret of the Emperor's guardians, and their watch continues unbroken. In the corridors of the dark cells, in the depths beneath the Imperial Palace, Shadowkeepers stand their posts as they have for 10 millennia, maintaining the vigil that protects humanity from horrors it must never face. On distant worlds across the galaxy, other Shadowkeepers hunt for artifacts and entities that escaped when the Great Rift opened, working to recapture them before they can cause catastrophe. The galaxy in the 41st millennium is a dark and terrible place, where threats assail humanity from every direction, where survival itself is a constant struggle against overwhelming odds. But among all these threats, among all the Xenos invasions and heretic uprisings and demonic incursions, there exist horrors that are worse, things so terrible that even acknowledging their existence could break the sanity of those who learned of them. Against these ultimate threats, the Shadowkeepers stand watch. They are the wall between humanity and annihilation, the wardens of the last prison, the guardians of secrets that must never be revealed. They ask for nothing, expect no recognition, seek no reward beyond the knowledge that they have fulfilled their duty to the Emperor and to the species he seeks to protect. Their armor is black where others wear gold, marking them as different, as set apart. Their robes are crimson, the color of blood and sacrifice. They walk in shadow and stand in darkness, watching over horrors that most would flee from in terror. And they will continue to stand watch, continue to hunt, continue to guard, for as long as the Imperium endures and the Emperor requires their service. This is the story of the Shadow Keepers, the most secret Custodes. It is a story of sacrifice without glory, of duty without recognition, of warriors who chose to bear burdens that would break lesser beings. It is a story that will never be fully told, because the secrets they keep cannot be shared. The knowledge they carry cannot be spoken. But it is a story that needs to be known, at least in outline, at least in the broad strokes that can be revealed without compromising security. Because the Shadow Keepers represent something important about the Imperium and about humanity's struggle for survival. They demonstrate that sometimes the greatest heroism lies not in glorious charges or dramatic victories, but in patient watchfulness, in standing vigil over threats that must be contained, in bearing burdens that never end. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and humanity faces extinction from 1,000 directions, the Shadow Keepers serve as a reminder that survival sometimes requires warriors to embrace thankless duties, to accept missions that offer no glory, to sacrifice not just their lives, but their very identity to causes that can never be publicly acknowledged. They are the wardens of humanity's nightmares, the keepers of its darkest secrets, the guardians of the prison that holds old night's final terrors. And as long as there are custodians willing to don the black armor and crimson robes, willing to descend into the dark cells and stand watch over what must never be released, the Imperium has a chance to survive. This is their watch, this is their duty, this is their burden, and they will never falter. If you enjoyed learning about the Shadow Keepers and want to dive deeper into Warhammer 40K lore, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There are countless stories waiting to be told in this vast, dark universe, and your support helps make these deep dives possible. Thank you for watching, and remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But there are also those who stand watch in the shadows, guarding against horrors that must never be unleashed. The Emperor protects.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.